I think this is one of the unique things early on at Facebook of like the existence of a growth team. And the distinction that I would make for at a high level of what a growth team is versus what a normal product team is a growth team, their product is a metric as opposed to a part of the app or site that they have. Understand Identify Execute is one of like the core product frameworks that Facebook operates on. I think it was coined by Naomi Gleit, who's the head of product at Facebook now, but she was one of the early growth PMs like back in the day. At a small company, you're having to wear a lot of hats. At a larger company, there ends up being a lot more specialization. As a big product growth person, I don't get hung up on the big shiny pieces. Like my favorite things are like the small overlooked optimizations. I'd rather have 100 small little things than one big giant sexy thing. The small details and inches matter, particularly when you're working on a big project. I'm a huge proponent of like, just keep it as simple as you can, like avoid as many like ratios as possible. If you're working at a FAANG company, you won the income game. You can start optimizing around something else. Money isn't the main factor. It's more around optimizing around different things separate from income and just making sure you're able to take advantage of the opportunities that you've been given, but then know that you can have a lot of optionality in your life that this money can afford you.
I'm really excited about today's episode of the Product Growth Podcast. Today, we're joined by Andre Nader. Thanks so much for being here.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm excited to chat with you today.
So if you don't know Andre, he's a tech industry veteran with 15 years of experience, including nearly a decade on Facebook's product growth team. Andre has now transitioned to being a semi-retired stay-at-home dad, and he runs the popular FAANG Fire newsletter, helping tech workers achieve financial independence. In this episode, we'll explore the parallels between growing products and personal finances, and dive into Andre's insights on FAANG compensation, benefits, and the path to financial independence, retire early, or FIRE. To start, I want to double click on your transition into Meta because a lot of people want to work there. Right now, they pretty much pay at the very top of the market in terms of growth product and product management pay. If you're trying to help somebody reverse engineer how Meta reached out to you, what are some of the tips and things they should be thinking about?
Yeah, I think what I would do is like put yourself in the recruiter's shoes. And the recruiter, like their main job is to be able to find candidates that will then get hired. Like that's like their primary metric. That's their success. That's what all their bonus is tied to. So one of the big things I would encourage you to do is honestly, like look at LinkedIn to see where the people that are now in the roles that you're wanting had worked in the past. So for me, I hadn't been looking at Facebook, and no one really at my company had been at Facebook before. But you have recruiters, you have sourcers that are constantly setting out feelers on LinkedIn, and eventually they find little honeypots of maybe overlooked talent that really fits this role that they have really well. And what they'll end up doing is trying to exploit it as much as possible. So the recruiters at Meta for the growth marketing team found out that, hey, indeed, for their digital marketing team and their online marketing team, they operate very similar to how our team's growth marketing team works. So what ended up happening is I think almost every single person on my online marketing team at the time ended up working at or interviewing at Facebook. The recruiters got hungry and went all in at once. At one point, my interview was originally scheduled for a Friday, and I was really excited to be able to spend the weekend in San Francisco on Facebook's dime. However, at the last minute, they moved me to like a Tuesday. And I found out another one of my colleagues was interviewing on Friday, and I imagine they didn't want us to overlap in person to run into each other. And again, the internet marketing team at Indeed was fairly small, and we were fairly open with each other, at least at some level. So we knew that some of us were interviewing at there. So I brought it up with my recruiter. I'm like, hey, just a heads up, like I know this person is going to be there on Friday. If the reason you moved me to Tuesday is because of that, like it's not a big deal. Like I can roll with it. Like we're not doing anything. We're not doing anything there. And actually set off all kinds of like fire drills on their end because they're like, oh no, like they might be talking to each other. We need to make sure that there's no overlap in any interview questions. We need to make sure just like a lot of extra things that I hadn't fully appreciated as someone who had now done interviews for Facebook. But hadn't been thinking about where it's like, oh, okay, I actually set off a lot of like red flags where it caused extra extra headache potentially for the people that were interviewing me. But essentially, the recruiters found a little honeypot and then exploited it as much as they can. And as you have new sourcers coming into those roles doing their hiring, what they're going to do is, one, go through and see what worked for their past sourcers, see what companies that they tapped into. And then they're also going to go through the job profiles of the people that are currently there, and see like, all right, this person is super successful in this role. Where were they before this? How do I find this person before I now have to poach them from another FAANG, because it's going to be even harder convincing them to leave, and going through like maybe 2 jobs before. And you'll find different trends and kind of like honeypots of companies that are really big feeders for like the FAANG companies. Like one notorious one within Facebook is if you're looking at like for a data role, whether it's on the team I was on, which is product marketing, which was again, growth marketing turned into product marketing. I know that's something that we wanted to talk about, or also even like data science. You'll see a lot of people come from a handful of companies, one of those really being Capital One. And what ends up happening is Capital One just has a phenomenal ability to bring in college grad talent and train them up from raw college grad to really strong data scientists, analysts, and marketers. And some companies, oftentimes, like the Facebooks of the world, they're not as strong at bringing someone in from zero and training them up. They're much more, they do a better job, and they're willing to pay for bringing someone in who can already has that skill set and kind of hit the ground running. This is different for engineering, obviously. Engineering, they have an entire pipeline, but for like every other role, having an entry-level function there is more rare. Like even on the product management side, like there's some coming in through those APM or associate product management roles or the rotational product management systems, but those are a fraction of the amount of people that come in from already having industry talent. So finding out where those honeypots are of that those recruiters like to consistently tap into is one of the things that I would encourage people to like look into. Like, okay, if you're wanting to end up at Facebook, finding the companies that feed into those types of roles at somewhere like Facebook.
Today's episode is brought to you by June, the customer analytics for product-focused teams. Are you not sure what users do in your SaaS? What features they use the most? Do you wish that you could know what each company does and use this information to generate incremental lift in revenue? June is the product analytics platform you need. It generates profiles for each of your customers that get you closer to your most important ones. It also connects your product data to your CRM so you can get a full view of your customers in one place, so you can engage with the right message at the right time. What makes June different is that it's made for B2B SaaS. It comes with account-level analyses, fast ways to look up your customers, and CRM integrations to share this information between your product, your success, and sales teams. And one line of code is all you need, and you're good to go. Sign up for a free trial today at june.so/Aakash. That's june.so/AAKASH. You get a discount if you use my link. This episode is brought to you by Adio, the next generation CRM. Imagine a world where your CRM is powerful, easily configured, and actually intuitive. Adio makes that a reality. As I've profiled in the Product Growth newsletter, setting up Adio takes less than a minute, and within seconds of syncing your email and calendar, you'll see your relationships in one place, enriched with valuable data, including things like relationship strength. Adio lets you build Zapier-style automations, create powerful reports, and works for any go-to-market motion, from PLG to sales-led. Adio is designed for the next era of companies like yours. And companies like yours shouldn't have to deal with inflexible, one-size-fits-all CRMs. Join industry leaders like 11 Labs, Replicate, and Modal. Head to adio.com/productgrowth and you'll get 15% off your first year. That's attio.com/productgrowth. Is it fair to say, like Capital One and Indeed, what the similarity is those are like $100 billion market cap companies, and Facebook is like $1 trillion market cap. So is it fair to say that like it's often those companies that are kind of one rung below in market cap that you should try to get into?
Yeah, I mean, Indeed was much smaller at the time than that. I had been there, and they just gotten acquired by Recruit, which is a Japanese job holding company. And it was definitely like multiple rungs below at the time in terms of just like revenue scale. Large number of users though. I think it's like generally that I think that trend holds true where it's like identifying those honeypots of, because again, it's not going to be a honeypot if it's like a super small company. It's just going to be more of a one-off. Like it definitely exists, people at very small startups. But from a recruiter standpoint, maybe I'll find one person at the startup that's even worth being able to bring in for an interview. But if I get an in within somewhere like a Capital One or like somewhere that has an established team, like maybe at Indeed, where there's a dozen people that I can talk to, it's kind of the way to think about it. It's like you could be that one person at the company, but it's gonna be hard to find you. Or you can be one of a handful of people with similar skill sets that's just gonna be easier for the recruiters to come across you. Yes, there's all these things that you could do to be proactive. Like if I was being very intentional around wanting to work at somewhere like a Facebook or a Google, and I knew I had the skill set already, then naturally what I would do to be intentional about it is like tap into my network, try to see if there's anyone I have in my network that works at those places. Because what people don't realize is if you have a referral going into these companies, oftentimes there's an entirely separate pipeline for referrals versus people that are outreached by recruiting. And it's a way to, or if you apply directly, like they're all separate pipelines. Like the recruiter, if they self-source you, it goes through one pipeline. If you're referred, it goes through another pipeline. If you apply, it goes through a different one. So just identifying what advantages that you can have is really going to be important. And if you're wanting to work there, making sure to see if you have someone in your network already, ideally, that you've worked with in the past, to be able to tap into them, do that before you apply. I think the biggest mistake I see people do is they'll apply and then reach out like, hey, Andre, I just applied at Facebook. Can you refer me? I'm like, you already applied. You're in the system. I can't do anything. Like I will help you and talk to you about the thing that you're wanting to talk about, but you're already in the system. Like this is a CRM based machine that I can't, like there's not a lot I could do. I can like poke the recruiter, but it's an entirely separate process. The self-apply versus the referred pipelines.
You joined Facebook on, I believe you said like the growth marketing analyst team. And then I believe you over time made it into the product growth organization. So can you talk about that?
A fascinating thing. I learned the importance of job titles in a way that I hadn't fully appreciated. So at the time when I joined Facebook in 2014. I joined as a growth marketing analyst, IC4, which I had no idea these levels even existed when I first joined. I only learned about them like a year later when I was going through my first performance review. So I think that speaks to how sophisticated people are now going through the interview processes of just like how fine-tuned they understand the intricacies of role, level, and compensation at a greater degree than ever before. But for me, joining as a growth marketing analyst, and that was just the name of the team. It had morphed because originally growth marketing at Facebook was actually digital marketers. The Alex Schultz was what is now the CMO of Meta, was one of the founding members of this like growth marketing team. And he comes from a background of direct response marketing. Like he's an SEO whiz, like just like a pro digital marketer, direct response marketer, where it's very conversion rate focused, metrics focused, but all around bringing people in and getting them to convert on whatever you're trying to convert them on. That kind of traditional thing that we're talking about, that's what marketers do. You own those landing pages, you do those optimizations. And that's how that growth marketing team started at Facebook, in that same way, where you have this kind of like separate digital marketing team that's doing SEO, they're doing paid search, they're doing all these different things to acquire users for Facebook. Over time, they realize that this skill set is not just valuable for digital marketing in isolation, but just like we were talking about, they can have even more impact if they're working really closely with the product teams. So over time, this digital marketing team turned into a growth marketing team. And I believe they're one of the first companies to use this term growth marketing and use that to refer to the digital marketing space. Before, it was very much SEO, SEM for search engine marketing, and lived different titles there. But they really kind of pioneered that role of what growth marketing was. And over time, they had these growth marketers or these marketers closer and closer to the products. And at Facebook, they're one of the companies that early on started to develop these growth teams. And I think the alignment of a growth team with this digital marketing, growth marketing function is really where some of the magic happened. And I think this is one of the unique things early on at Facebook of like the existence of a growth team. And the distinction that I would make for at a high level of what a growth team is versus what a normal product team is a growth team, their product is a metric as opposed to a part of the app or site that they have. Instead of saying like this team owns like messaging, it's this team owns like the number of people using Messenger on a monthly basis. Or early on at Facebook, it was all around like the monthly active people. So it was all around a growth team. And I say team being the product manager, engineering, data science, like the all end to end, where their main goal was driving the number of monthly active people. So that's like the growth team there. And they had the ability to work across the entire ecosystem stack on any project that they could prioritize that was all around trying to drive that top line monthly active people for that core growth at Facebook team. So that's what growth marketing kind of evolved to and started at. Over time, it became that more and more where these growth teams started developing more and more at different parts of, within different parts of Facebook. I spent most of my time within the small business, self-serve side of like the Facebook pages ecosystem, the Facebook advertising ecosystem, which is all around helping small businesses be successful on Facebook, both organically as well as from an advertising standpoint. So there was growth teams there. There's growth teams on Messenger, growth teams on WhatsApp, growth teams on Oculus. And then within the core of Facebook, going deep into each individual product may have its own growth team. Maybe Newsfeed has a growth team. Search might have a growth team. The like social giving, like there's like a number of different areas that traditionally be like, okay, these are where there's like entire organizations around, but then within those organizations, they may have a growth team or two focused on growing something kind of across the like a specific metric within those teams. And that's what this like, again, started from as a growth marketer and growth marketing working on these like core growth teams to Facebook evolving this concept of growth product teams and the growth marketing team kind of evolving alongside that growth and that kind of establishment of a growth team. It became having a product manager, a DS, data scientist, a team of engineers, and also a growth marketer. That was kind of like one of the key things of that a growth team at Facebook had. And what ended up happening is the term growth marketing ended up growing significantly within the industry and becoming like the predominant way that people describe digital marketing. The problem was we were no longer, like there were still teams within Facebook that were doing like the core digital marketing, still doing a lot of paid search on bringing users to Facebook. I think they have one of the larger paid search teams than many other companies that people don't realize. But the vast majority of growth marketers weren't doing that. They were doing this role that didn't exist before, where it was kind of this like product analyst that was deeply embedded within these product teams that were growth product teams that deeply cared about specific metrics. And the role was really around filling in gaps that existed between roles. Like there were data scientists, there were product managers, but the growth marketer's role within these teams was all around filling in the gaps between there. And they could lean in and be the data scientist at times. They could lean in and be the product manager at times, depending on the project. It was all around taking this kind of like very like startup scrappy mentality and having this as a function that was then within these kind of growth product teams. But what happened there was there ended up being a disconnect between how they hire for growth marketing versus what growth marketing meant in the market. And that is a problem for a couple reasons. One, the skill set that we're hiring for wasn't coming from what the traditional growth marketing roles at other companies were anymore. The teams that were still doing only paid search or only SEO weren't close enough to the product in a way that they can join Facebook and be successful as a growth marketer right away. So they were having to hire more for maybe very data focused product managers because you've worked at small companies. A product manager doesn't get the luxury of sitting back and having their data scientists do everything. They have to do everything themselves. Like you have to wear a lot of hats. So we realized like, hey, there's this skill set. Maybe it also is looking at very technical product managers or very product focused data scientists or very technical marketers that were in these unicorn positions where they were very embedded within the products, and really having to identify those different pockets. But the challenge was then recruiting them. They didn't want to join as a growth marketer. It felt different than like, I'm a product manager on this growth team over here. I don't want to join as a growth marketer. That's like a different, that's not where I want my career to advance to. Even though the role itself was exactly what they were wanting to do, the term meant something different. So that was like one thing on the recruiting standpoint. The second piece is, once you realize when you're at a large company, there's a lot of like things that happen in the background, and the names and titles of things end up being more important than you realize. One of the ways that this kind of materializes is in the form of how your compensation is determined. Like you said early on, companies like Facebook are targeting paying it like the top 90th percentile for their job category. And that piece is where it's important. Like, what is the job category that they're referencing? So the issue that was happening was, for these growth marketing analysts, they were being referenced and compared to being in the 95th percentile compensation-wise of people in digital marketing, when the skill set that we had was much more, it was just different. It was like more overlapping with data science, more overlapping with product management. So we had this lag in the short term where our compensation wasn't keeping up with the skill set that we had. And people were leaving and becoming either data scientists or product managers at other companies, and seeing pay bumps because of that. Even though, hey, we were getting paid at the 95th percentile, but it was for a skill set that was different than what we actually had. So what ended up happening is we had the name of growth marketing changed to product growth. The function didn't change. It was just a better reflection of what we actually were doing and a better reflection of what the market was. So even though Facebook may have been one of the pioneers of the role of what growth marketing meant, they kind of evolved away from what the market then turned it into, and essentially had to come up with this like new role. And like maybe this is something that exists now or more and more. And essentially there's like a dedicated role where it's product growth and having product growth analysts, where it's distinct from product managers working on growth. It's distinct from data scientists. It's its own unique thing. And I think it's also one of the challenges too, is like, it's still a nascent role and a nascent function that doesn't exist everywhere. So there's still work that has to be done every time you're talking to someone around like, what do you do? What is product growth at Facebook? Because it doesn't exist at very many places, and rightfully so. I think having this very unique specialized role only makes sense, I think, when you're at a company like Facebook that can have the resources to have dedicated growth teams. Otherwise, it's kind of like, hey, like, you're being a product manager that's focused on growth is like the closest thing, or being a data scientist that's very like a product analyst data scientist. Again, there's another story on the data science side that it's probably not worth going into. But they had gone through a similar rebrand where early on at Facebook, they had product analysts, but now the product analyst function doesn't really exist. They've changed most of them to data scientists, where back in the day, data scientists meant you had like a PhD in statistics and we're doing machine learning only, where now data science has like a much broader umbrella. Again, for the same reason, recruiting and being able to keep up with the compensation.
Okay, so when you left and you were a product growth manager, you were working with another product manager on your product team.
Correct. Yeah. So when I finally left, I was working on the core Facebook team all around ads and small businesses again, but all dedicated within Facebook. And there's an entire product team at Facebook that works on monetization. This is a huge organization of engineering, product management, where they're entirely dedicated to businesses and advertising at Facebook. Like, there's no surprise there. Every single ad format might have its own product manager. Every single interface might have a separate product manager that is specializing in something. And advertising and the business side, the ecosystem is pretty complex. There's like a lot of underlying teams that work around there. And the product growth analysts are embedded within some of these teams. It doesn't make sense for every team, but the ones that maybe have dedicated growth focuses would be ones where me at the time and then the people that are on my team would kind of be embedded within. And that's kind of how I referred to it as. It was technically not part of the team. We were a separate function, a separate organization, but our goal was to make the team feel like we were part of it. And we were directly embedded within them and all of our incentives were aligned with theirs in a way where we're all on the same page. If they're successful, we're successful, and that's kind of how the role operates at its best.
That's fascinating. Yeah, I've been writing this product growth newsletter now for 3 years, and I think this is the first time I've actually heard of this role. It sounds like you guys are basically helping the product manager of this core team, but you're actually like a separate team. You're trying to embed yourself and focus on, like you mentioned, a lot of these glue activities. They might dip into product management. They might dip into data science. Is that a fair sort of 2-line summary?
Yeah. I think what you'll realize, like at a small company, you're having to wear a lot of hats and like having to flow between teams at all times. At a larger company, there ends up being a lot more specialization where you have teams dedicated to specific parts of or specific parts of a feature or specific parts of an app. So like again, like talking about advertising, maybe there's a team that owns like the different ad formats around like messaging ads versus lead generation ads versus brand ads. Like maybe those are 3 different teams. And what ends up happening is they're each working on their own different maybe individual silos. And then the product growth analyst would be embedded within one of these teams, owning a top line metric for the team. Ideally, I would view them as like, hey, your job is to be like the best friend of the product manager. Because I think within these functions, the product managers are the most incentivized in terms of like having their teams hit goals, having their teams be like the execution side of things. So it's like a very execution focused role where the impact that you're able to drive, an actual metric impact that you're able to like say that you drove, is where the performance is. And like how you do that is different within every single team. I think that's one of the challenges too. Some teams it's going to be more on the product management side where you're going to need to be like going deep and working on like relationships with other teams and getting unblocked and getting other teams to allow you to ship certain functions that will help your top line metric. Other times it's going to be, hey, your team is actually short on analytics space, or maybe the data science team is deep on this other project that's focused on the long-term vision of how your product works, where as a product growth analyst, you're much more incentivized on the top line metric that the team has for maybe the half or the year, and are just filling in gaps that exist that are preventing the team from moving as fast as they can on executing on those types of projects. So it's all around doing whatever you can to get the teams unblocked, where it's like if you need the data to help the product manager prioritize something, then it's that. If you need the data to help unblock an engineer from shipping an experiment, then you're going to go do that. If you're blocked on not having a flushed out PRD, then going through and rolling up your sleeve and physically doing that. So it's a unique role where it's like a jack of all trades that is very rare, I think, at large companies. Like there's a lot of specialization that happens, and I think that's where like the product growth role within Facebook is unique because it incentivizes you to wear a lot of hats, where your goal isn't to do one thing or the other. The goal is to have the impact, and you just have this skill set on the product management side, on the data science side, on the like conversion rate, direct response marketing side, to be able to lean into those different skills all around being able to, again, drive impact. And again, it sounds like cheesy and generic of like, oh, you're focused on impact. Everyone's focused on impact, but they're overly indexed on that impact piece and overly measured performance-wise, depending on how they're able to actually drive that impact.
So I think Facebook has something like 80,000 employees. How many of those would be product managers, and then how many of those would be on this product growth team?
Yeah, I'm not sure on the specific numbers, particularly now, having been out for a year and a half. But like, relatively speaking, the product growth function was a fraction the size of all these other ones, just by nature of what the role was. Not every product team at Facebook would have a product manager, but not every team would have a product growth analyst. It was only on those teams that a product growth analyst would actually be set up to be successful on. Like if there's a team that's like, it has to be growth focused team, it has to be a metric focused team, or a area of the company that we're wanting to help get more goal and metric focused. But the unique space of like, there's like the core growth pieces where Facebook will always care about like monthly active people on Facebook or like daily active people on Facebook. But maybe there's like more nascent like 0 to 1 projects where sometimes it makes sense to have growth people on, but other times it might be allowing those teams to establish early product market fit. And then once that's established, then adding a growth person on later on to kind of amplify the growth and success of the product. It's kind of like there's many different models and ways that they've approached it over the years within Facebook specifically.
Got it. So now let's get into the practice of this product growth, like how you actually do it. You've written about Facebook's core product framework, understand, identify, execute. Could you break this down for us? And most importantly, can you share like a specific example of how this led to significant growth at Facebook?
Yeah, absolutely. I think so for those that don't know, like the understand, identify, execute is one of like the core product frameworks that Facebook operates on. I think it was coined by Naomi Gleit, who's the head of product at Facebook now. But she was one of the early growth PMs, like back in the day, even talking about like the Facebook.com days. And the way that understand, identify, execute is broken down is, one, understand, it's all around understanding the problem space that you're operating in. Identify is identifying all the levers that you have to help you achieve your goal. And then execute is just all around how do you work on using those levers as perfectly as possible, and being able to like just grind as much as you can on getting every last inch out of the levers that you have. And the way this kind of breaks down is like, one, from the understand standpoint, it's like it's rooted in data. Like how much can you understand the area that you're working in? Like what is the thing that matters the most? So for me, I spend a lot of time working on the within the business ecosystem space. So let's say like the business space, we're talking about like Facebook business pages. And one of the things that we really cared about was how do we grow the number of business pages on Facebook? Again, this is like a very high level generic thing where we just want as many businesses on Facebook, and we want to grow that number. So the first part is like identifying it. Like, what does it even mean to be a business on Facebook? Like, what does that even look like? Like how are they, like, what does it mean at a definitional standpoint? Like, is it the use of a specific product? Like, what does that look like? What interfaces are they using? How does it look across countries? What are all of the funnels that are important for someone to become an active business page on Facebook? And breaking it down by every single country, every single interface, and really just going super, super deep on trying to see like what matters. Like one, how has the metric moved, or how has this product grown in the past? Really understand how it's grown. A lot of this is around like, hey, like let's say that you care about this like one specific metric, like number of pages on business pages on Facebook. Like even starting with how has that metric moved in the past, even if you didn't have any dedicated growth work on it, and being able to see like, oh, hey, there's like these like weird spikes in the graph where all of a sudden there's like weird increases in like monthly active businesses on these specific months, or maybe these specific months of users have much higher retention than other months. And part of the understand process is trying to go deep into like what's unique about those specific months, like what happened in those months where those spikes were caused. Oftentimes it might be something. There's like two main causes that happen from spikes. Is like one, a product launch, like there's some new functionality that existed, or two, someone fixed something that was broken. Like maybe there was a past lever that was really effective, and someone fixed it, and all of a sudden things spiked back up and kind of increased. And that's for a growth team, like super important to understand, because hey, now that like there is something that we've identified that can actually move this top line metric that we care about. And that's kind of how you move into this like identify phase where you have all this data, you understand kind of like the high level problem space, you understand all the funnels that are going into it. Now you're understanding like what are the levers that you can pull to actually move that metric. And this can be anything from like getting new pages to be created. Like that's like the top of the funnel. Like let me get new pages, new businesses onto Facebook for the very first time. Like what does that funnel look like? And then I said something interesting before. Like I didn't say number of business pages on Facebook. I said number of active business pages on Facebook. That word active is interesting. Like what does that mean? And trying to go deep into understanding the levers of a inactive page versus an active page. And then you start going down the path of like, oh, like we have this huge corpus of businesses on Facebook, but they're not actually using the product anymore. Why is that? Like what's happening there? Then you go into like that can go in a couple different ways where it's like the retention of people that are already using the product and keeping them using it, but also how do you resurrect the people that were using it in the past? what caused them to stop using it in the first place? And throughout that entire process, you're identifying all these different levers. So you have like, okay, this top line metric I care about, monthly active pages on Facebook. Some of the levers I have are new businesses being created. Other ones are around like maybe it's like people messaging the business, and that's what's keeping them active. Like they're getting messages from people that are then making them go to their page. And then for whatever reason, the definition of being an active business involves them reading and interacting with messages from users. That makes a lot of sense. So that's another lever. Maybe they're posting on their Facebook page and getting interactions from users. So then you have another lever, like posting to Facebook. Or the other side of that, having consumers interacting with their content, another lever. And then you kind of go down along the list as much as you can, identifying all these levers. Like, okay, why would a user interact with this page? Oh, they must be connected to the page in some way. So then it's around, okay, the connections between users and people. And then, hey, they're connected, but they're not actually seeing the content. Why? Oh, is it because the page isn't posting at all? Or is there a ranking issue when the businesses are posting to feed? Maybe the newsfeed is ranking their friends' content more than this business content. And there's all these different things that go on in this identify phase where you're just identifying every single lever as possible and trying to go through and trying to figure out like which levers are more important than others. And some of this goes from the data around like how like at a correlation standpoint of like, hey, like it seems like when businesses get messages, they're more active. And intuitively, I can understand that because like, hey, like there's a business user messaging a business, and a lot of things needed to happen for that to happen in the first place. But let's ignore that. And then it seems like the more businesses that get messages, the more active they are. So that's like one lever, and really understanding how that works. And like, you don't have test data to say that that's true, but you have a lot of anecdotal or a lot of like correlation data where it's like, of the businesses that are active, a lot of them are getting messages. And then it kind of goes into the execution standpoint where it's like, okay, how do we prove that and move it from pure correlation to actually causal relationships? And that's where Facebook, I think, is really good at like A/B testing everything, and maybe even have past A/B tests that you can kind of look at and reference to see whether these causal relationships exist. But then going through each of these levers and starting to like identify which ones that you can test, prioritize which ones you should test first, which are going to be the biggest impact ones. And then as you identify those and start identifying levers that actually work, really execute on those perfectly, and try to get every single thing that you can out of that lever as possible. So for example, in this case of like, hey, we identify messaging as a huge lever of getting businesses to be active. How do we try to increase that as much as possible? Let's get more users who are prone to messaging business connecting with more businesses. Let's make the messaging button on the pages easier. Let's remove as much friction as possible between a user going to a page and messaging the business. Let's push it to the extreme where as soon as you go to a business page, all of a sudden there's a message dialogue that pops up, and there's some pre-filled questions that they have that you can ask the business on. That's like taking it to the most extreme boundary of that specific lever to identify as much as you can of how that lever can move to ultimately, again, going back to like the metric that you're saying you're caring about in the beginning, which is that like getting businesses active on Facebook. And again, like that's like a potential vanity metric. Like maybe down the line, it's more of like we care about revenue, and revenue is such a deep funnel action that maybe early on it doesn't make sense to focus on. Like, yes, ultimately revenue is what you care about, but the way that you're driving revenue is through these other higher level important organic actions that you're able to kind of dedicate growth teams to, which again is like high level like ecosystem around growing the number of business pages. And then maybe you establish some levers are so important that maybe they should have their own growth teams. Like maybe messaging for businesses is so important, there should be a dedicated growth team only focused on that. And it kind of evolves over time, and really kind of, again, in this like organic way where you're identifying these opportunities and new things kind of come from it, and getting the core product team that you're on to focus on it. And then in the future, maybe it's making the case that there should be dedicated teams to drive maybe sub-metrics within that world.
The future of marketing is word of mouth. Turn your users and partners into your most valuable growth channel with podcast partner Cello. Cello is the only all-in-one solution to engage your most passionate users and partners to refer your product with just a few clicks. Best of all, Cello is directly embedded into your product and handles everything from referral payments to tax and compliance. And it runs on autopilot, so you can focus on scaling and building your own product. Here's how it works. First, within just a few hours, Cello integrates with your product and existing tools to automate all manual work. In your dashboard, you can then set up your referral campaign, define the reward details, and make the referral experience your own. After the program goes live, Cello continuously analyzes and scales its performance based on AI-generated recommendations. Plus, you only pay if you're successful. Go give it a try for free and learn more about user-led growth at cello.so/productgrowth. Very cool. So it's like a sort of core science framework applied to growth and the science of how to create new growth teams. I love that. So another sort of opinion you have that's really interesting that I think derives from your experience at Product Growth is kind of this contrarian opinion on metrics I've heard you talk about. You've mentioned hating complicated metrics and ratio metrics.
Yeah.
So can you explain why and maybe share a story of when simplified metrics led to better decision-making or product outcomes?
Yeah, so I think like that's a good question of like what is a simple metric and what is a complicated metric? What is in a ratio metric? Let's start with a ratio metric. Like a ratio metric would be like the like I care about the percent of Facebook business pages that receive a message. And my goal as a team is to have 70% of active business pages receiving messages. And what ends up happening when you have these ratio metrics is like teams are incentivized to try to grow their top line metric. That's good. That's like a healthy thing that you want. That's why you have the goal in the first place, is so teams can be prioritizing things to try driving that metric. But when you have something like a ratio metric, the natural thing is like, oh, let me break down this ratio metric into the two components that go into it. The top one is the number of business, the percent of those, or like of those businesses that already are active. How do I make sure that they're getting messages? And then the bottom half of that fraction is the number of businesses that are active on the ecosystem. So let's say, for example, like the team is working on some projects where they are doing something, and for whatever reason, it drastically increases the number of businesses that are active on Facebook, but it doesn't actually move the number of those that are, or the percent of those that are getting messages. Maybe it increases the overall number of businesses that are getting messages, but that ratio decreased. So all of a sudden you're incentivizing teams to not do the most optimal thing potentially. They're like, oh, we could launch this thing, and yes, it would lead to more businesses getting messages, but it would disproportionately increase the number of businesses that aren't getting messages. And that would actually hurt our goals. And so we're not incentivized to ship that product. And maybe we're more incentivized to, like, you could do something and you care so much about some ratio where you're actively decreasing the number of active business pages you have, but your goal metric is increasing because that percent is happening there. So that's like one reason why like ratio metrics, I have a animosity towards generally, just because it like forces you to look at things in funny ways and like game things in ways that might not be as optimal overall. And then the second piece is like complicated metrics. Oh, sorry, I lost the window. Complicated metrics. And the way that you see these all the time. Like you're going to be like, maybe you have a data scientist on the team, and they did this like awesome analysis onto like all the factors that are so important for a business to receive messages. Like the most important things are like a business needs at least like 100 connections with users, and they need 100 different visitors. And if they're in these specific categories, like maybe they're in like the e-commerce category, like that's like super correlative of being a business. And if they advertise, they're much more likely to get messages. So all of a sudden, like you put all these things together, and like your metric ends up being like, our metric is to grow the number of businesses with 100 fans and that are in the e-commerce business category that have at least 500 visits. And like on paper, each of these individual things sound good, but then you end up in a complicated way. And again, like you won't see all these things at once. You'll see something. You'll see you'll see it like one level removed. You'll see something be like, we're growing the number of actively engaged messaging businesses. And each of these are loaded words. Like, oh, okay, what does actively engaged messaging business mean? And that's where you start seeing these business rules start applying. Oh, to be actively engaged, they need at least 100 connections, and they need to have X number of visits, and they need to have X number of messages. And that's where you see things happening. It's not like the top line metric being like this like crazy ratio with square roots. Like, you don't see that. All you see is this like engaged thing. And then like one level deeper and you're like, okay, what does engaged mean? And that's where the complication happens. And again, like, you want growth teams to be like at some level, like really deeply understanding their metric. And by doing that, they're going to go deep into like each individual input that matters within there. And then you have them focused on like, okay, how do I increase this part of this ratio fraction thing to drive my top line? Okay, it moved, but it wasn't as important. And then maybe you're having a team meeting and be like, okay, we moved this aspect of it. And then you're needing to spend 5 minutes on like why that's important. Like, why does the number of visits to a business page matter? Like, oh, it matters because it's part of our engaged definition. And every meeting will be like 10 minutes explaining how the thing that you did ladders up to the top line metric, and then why that even matters and why it's important. And it just like loses sight of what you're actually trying to do. So I'm a huge proponent of like, just keep it as simple as you can, like avoid as many like ratios as possible. Like there's a time and a place for having some complexity, and like removing the complexity if it's possible. And like getting to the core of like, if you drive this specific goal, the specific metric, is that ultimately something that will like be good for the business, be good for your organization, be good for the company, if this moved. And like the closer that you can get to that simplified state, like the better. Like there's going to be times where that's not going to work, and you're going to want a little bit more complexity. And because you're going to want to incentivize teams to do specific things, like maybe it's really like, again, you don't want to incentivize them to like maybe grow the number of businesses because the product isn't at a place where, or they don't want you don't want them to grow in a way that's like maybe unhealthy, and you're wanting to incentivize them to do something different than just pure growth. And that's where it's like some of the complexity can be there, but I'm very, very hesitant anytime I see teams pick up ratio metrics or pick up like very complicated metrics to start with. I'm like, you can slowly get there, and even then I think there's a tremendous amount of value of like keeping it simple. And again, like I've seen so much more value, again, like just how much time is saved from every single meeting if you don't have to explain what the metric means, just because everyone understands it. And anytime you have a new person join the team, needing to spend like a month going through how we ended up with this like crazy ratio, fraction, square root metric, is just like a huge time savings and like simplification. And then again, anytime you're reporting up to senior leadership on like why like we did this and it improved this metric, and like why does that matter? Like the closer that you can get to a unified, simple language definition of something, I think it just saves so much time and just makes everyone's job easier, I think.
I love that lesson. I feel like that's sort of a core lesson from product growth at Facebook for everybody listening, where they really go after these simple top line metrics, and that helps create a shared language amongst all these different stakeholders that they have on their different teams and help communicate up to executives. Now I want to transition to a different topic, one that I really feel like there's no expert better to talk to besides you, which is optimizing that FAANG compensation once you get there. So your newsletter focuses heavily on this topic. And one of the posts that I quite like is about your RSU-based total compensation dashboard. And you dive deep into this. For you listeners who might not have read that or seen that, can you kind of explain the high-level elements of what goes into this dashboard and how people should be thinking about their FAANG compensation?
Yeah, absolutely. And a lot of this is less around like optimizing your compensation. Like I think a lot of the readers will be surprised where it's just really understanding your compensation. I think most people have no idea how much they're getting paid. And like you'll see people on Blind posting like total comp or GFO and saying like these, like everyone says they care about their total comp and has all this jargon around it. And again, total compensation, for those that don't know, that aren't in the terrible Blind ecosystem, it's just like how much you actually paid all in. Like your total compensation is your base salary, which is what you're seeing every other week or twice a month or twice a week paycheck. Like that's your base. Then your bonus, which is maybe something that you get paid once a year, maybe twice a year, depending on which company you work on, maybe more frequently, maybe less frequently. And then the last piece is the stock-based compensation. And for FAANG companies, particularly, the more senior that you get, the stock-based compensation ends up being a larger and larger component of it. And within FAANG, so again, like Facebook, Apple, Alphabet, Netflix is the exclusion because they don't do as much stock-based compensation. They allow you to do something a little bit different with options and allow you to have all of your salary in just base. But everyone else has a significant portion of your income coming in as restricted stock units. So all this is like let's say that when you first start, you'll get like $100,000 worth of restricted stock units that will vest over 4 years. And each of them will have slightly different vesting schedules, which is one of the things that's evolved over the past couple of years. But at Meta, let's say that it vests every quarter for the next 4 years. So every single quarter that you're at Meta, like 1/16, again, which is a quarter of the overall time period, 1/16 of your stock grant will vest, and you'll receive that money in your brokerage account in the form of stock. But what ends up happening is other than when you first start, you don't really realize how much money that might be. And like if you looked at Meta's stock price, like it's like gone anywhere from like $100 to like $450, and like it's gone like up and down, up and down. But what this also means is your actual compensation has gone up and down. And then if you've been working there for a while, like every single year you might get more equity. And the amount of the equity is valued has been different based on when you joined. And you just have this like drastic fluctuations in what your total compensation actually is. And then there's just big disconnect between how much people think they're getting paid, how much they're actually getting paid, both in the positive direction as well as in the negative direction. Sometimes people think they're getting paid much more than they are, but they've gone off some kind of equity cliff, because when you first join, your new higher equity grant is going to be much larger potentially than any of your underlying refreshers. So a lot of the work that I've done is like building dashboards, one, just to help me personally understand how much I'm making. And I ended up making it in a way where other people could use it, because more and more people were asking me about my own dashboard. So I created this total compensation dashboard, which is just all around what's your compensation? How much will you make over the next year? Taking all of your upcoming and past RSU vests and helping you understand what the current value is based on the current stock price. Just again, like to help you, one, like it's hard working at these companies. Like these companies can be a grind, and one of the big reasons why it makes it worth it is potentially the compensation. And I think it's just so important for people to just like understand how much they're getting paid. So that's like my big philosophy is just like, one, just like foundationally, I think it's important to understand your compensation and the different levers on it. Just like we're talking about like the metric levers that you have within a product, understanding like what are all the metric levers that you have on your compensation, and just to deeply understand those. Not to stress about it and think about it too deeply. I'm someone who doesn't encourage people to go like hyper optimizing how to make as much money while you're there, and how to hyper optimize like getting to the next level as fast as possible. But just like understanding like what happens if you get to the next level, understanding like how does your compensation change, understanding how your compensation changes 1 year to the next. Because I think it's important to when you're working at these companies, like to also always be looking at new opportunities, and how do you gauge whether a new opportunity is good or not if you don't know your current compensation. That's like a starting point for any baselining of future opportunities, is like knowing where you're currently at. So that's one of the things that I've spent a lot of time on, is just like, one, helping people understand how much they're getting paid. You'll be surprised how many people have no idea. And that's like perfectly fine. Like it's good. Like they are the best engineers. They are the best product managers. They are the best product analysts. They're the best researchers, content strategists. Like we haven't spent any time learning RSU-based compensation. Like there's nowhere that we've been taught this. So there's no, it seems silly not to know how much you get paid, but it's also at the same time, like no one's spent time teaching people how much they get paid and how the different components of their paycheck work, outside of maybe like once a year when you're going through some kind of performance summary cycle. And for the first time, you're seeing like your rating and how that impacts your bonus and all these different inputs that happen. And again, like I don't fault people for not knowing their compensation. I think it's like a complicated thing. And one of my goals is to make it as easy as possible for more people to understand this.
So it's less about optimize, more about understand. And I can really resonate with that, because honestly, when I've worked for these public tech companies, I never knew how much I made until I got my W-2. And I'm like, oh, wow, like I guess like some of these stocks were valued differently than I thought. And I got paid hundreds of thousands of dollars often, more or less than I expected. So I really resonate with that. But I still want to talk a little bit about optimization, because you have some posts on your newsletter that I quite like. Two of them that I like. One is the 3 tax mistakes that could cost you thousands. And then a second is the mega backdoor Roth strategy.
Yeah.
So for people who do care about optimizing the tax part of this, because when you're working at these companies, you're paying $100,000 to $400,000 tax per year. How do you optimize that?
Yeah, and let's start with the mega backdoor piece. And a lot of it comes down to one, just understanding what are the benefits that your company even offers. And it starts with the most common one being your retirement benefits. This is going to be your 401k. And understanding what your company match is there, as well as what are your different options for investing in your 401k. What are they? And I'm a huge advocate of just keeping things as simple as possible, and maximizing your tax advantaged accounts as much as possible. So when I'm saying tax advantaged accounts, hopefully your eyes didn't roll in the back of your head. All that means is things that are in your 401k that have different tax treatment than if you just had that money and put it in a normal Robinhood or Fidelity account. So these tax advantaged accounts exist because they're trying to incentivize you to do different things. So within the 401k, trying to incentivize you to save for retirement. So all of these companies will have 401ks where you can contribute up to $23,000 per year into either your pre-tax 401k or your Roth 401k. And your individual contribution can total $23,000. And oftentimes you'll have people that are working within the New Yorks or the San Franciscos, and they're making let's say $500,000. Then it becomes an easy choice of doing the pre-tax option. And this is just at $23,000. So that's a simple decision. You're electing some percent of your salary to go towards your pre-tax 401k, and you're maxing that out to $23,000, and you're getting whatever match your company has. So Meta and Google will match half of that. So you'll get $11,500 on top of that, going into your pre-tax 401k. But then there's this extra thing that is becoming more and more common, which I refer to as the mega backdoor. But if you're looking in your 401k, you won't see mega backdoor anyway, because it's just a colloquial term. What we're actually referring to is something called making a after-tax contribution to your 401k, and then being able to do an in-plan conversion of that into a Roth 401k. All jargon. This is all IRS terminology. Essentially, what ends up happening is you're able to contribute even more into your 401k, into a Roth IRA, a Roth 401k, Roth IRA, in a extreme amount that you normally wouldn't be able to. So in the Meta example, it's in the magnitude of being able to contribute, in addition to that $23,000 pre-tax, in addition to that $11,500 match that they have, able to contribute an extra $34,000 into this after-tax bucket. And what's special about this after-tax bucket is, within Meta's plan at least, you're able to instantly convert that into a Roth. So that ends up being after-tax money that will now grow tax and penalty free for the rest of your life. And then when you're in retirement, you're able to access this money without paying any taxes on it. And for a high-income earner, there's no other way that you can get this much money into a Roth account. Normal Roth IRAs are limited for people that are earning under $130,000. There's a way to contribute to those. That's a normal backdoor Roth. But again, that's limited to $7,000 per year, which is, it's fine, but it's not a huge amount. But this mega backdoor, we're talking about the order of more than $30,000 per year going into this Roth account. Over time, that can be super powerful. And then if you have 2 people in your household, all of a sudden you're talking about $69,000 each in a tax advantaged account just through your employer's 401ks, taking advantage of all these different things. So that's where the mega backdoor comes into play. It's taking advantage of the pre-tax, the company match, and this after-tax contribution that could then be rolled over into a Roth IRA. There's some extra steps there, so it's important depending on where you work at. So for example, my wife's so I was at Meta. There was a simple drop-down in the contribution thing where you selected automatic in-plan conversion, and there's nothing else you had to do. It automatically converted your money into a Roth. Versus my wife at my wife at Uber, you had to physically call Fidelity and ask them to convert the after-tax contribution into a Roth 401k. You could then get them to set it up automatically through calling them, but there was that extra additional step, because by itself having money in this after-tax bucket isn't valuable. It's just, again, it's IRS tax jargon. having money in after tax isn't good, but if you can get this after tax money into a Roth, then all of a sudden you never have to pay taxes on it again. Versus in this after tax bucket, you're still paying taxes on any gains while it's in that state. So the quicker that you can get it from after tax and into Roth is where the magic happens. So that's where like one of the biggest savings opportunities that people have, that if they're already saving money, trying to do it in the most tax advantaged way possible, that's like an often overlooked benefit that more and more tech companies are having. I think every single FAANG company has it, and then more outside of FAANG is increasingly starting to have it. So, and if you don't, ask your benefits team to see if they can add it and be like, hey, all of our competitors and all of the other companies have this benefit. Can we look into getting it? Oftentimes they're not aware of it, and it's something that they can just ask their 401k team, and it's something that can get added on in the future. So that's the mega backdoor piece. And again, I love optimizing all of those pieces. And the second one was all around the 3 biggest tax mistakes. Like one of the big things that happens is you're making all this compensation coming from your RSUs, and that's like the piece of your compensation that you're not actually aware about. And it's super variable. And by default, every single paycheck, some amount of your RSUs will get auto sold to cover your taxes. But what ends up happening is the amount of RSUs that's withheld for taxes isn't actually enough. Like there's a federal default called like it's a supplemental tax withholding rate, and it's like 22%. But if you're making $500,000, your actual tax rate is going to be much higher than 22%. So when you're doing your taxes the next year, all of a sudden you're getting this like $50,000 plus tax bill that you have no idea where it came from. It's all because what ended up happening was the RSUs that were auto sold and used to pay some of your taxes on, it was too small. And there's nothing wrong with owing this amount. It's just more around like owing $50,000 to the IRS isn't a big deal in most cases. Getting a surprise like $50,000 tax bill and having 1 month to pay it, like regardless of how much money you make, it still sucks. So it's all around just being prepared and understanding it. So that's like one of the things I see people make. And then there's just some like small, like little errors that often happen when you're getting equity-based compensation. Like for example, let's say that you're getting your RSUs and you're selling them. Maybe your brokerage didn't accurately match the cost basis. So an important thing people do not understand for whatever reason is when your RSUs vest, they're taxed as income at the moment that they're vest. So for example, let's say that you have $100,000 worth of Meta vesting this quarter. That $100,000 is treated as income. Like you'll be able to go into your pay stub and see RSUs, $100,000, and that's income according to the IRS. That's how you'll get taxed at it. It'll be treated as income. Then you'll have $100,000 minus however much was auto sold for taxes in your brokerage account. If you then sell right there's no additional taxes that need to be paid. If you wait and then the stock goes up in value, you'll then be paying additional taxes on only the gain between the price that it vested at and then the price that you sold at. And again, the stock can go up and down, so maybe there's not a gain, maybe there's going to be a loss. But knowing that your RSUs are taxed as income, and if you sell immediately after getting it, there's no additional taxes there. So that's why people often say, if you decide to hold your company RSUs, you're making the decision to, like the same decision as if they gave you cash and you deciding to hold it. So that's one I always push people on. Like, hey, did you use your cash bonus to buy more of your company's stock? No one has ever told me yes. However, a significant number of people have told me that they're holding their RSUs. And again, like there's like a lot of good reasons why you would want to do that potentially. But from a rational perspective, it's the exact same thing as if you were getting a cash bonus. And again, like people aren't rational, and anything dealing with money, we're never perfectly rational. There's a lot of FOMO that gets involved with how we approach our RSUs. And then there's this extra piece of like just not understanding how the tax is work. So just know, hey, your stock vested. If you sell right away, there's no additional taxes because you only pay additional taxes on the gain between when it vested and when you sold it. So that's like one of the things that people don't understand. But then on top of this, when you're then filing your taxes, sometimes the brokerage just messes up and it has the cost basis as 0. So when you're selling Meta, maybe for $400 per share, they're going to treat it as $400 entirely as a gain. While in actuality, that $400, like you invested at $400 and you sold it at $400, so there actually wasn't any gain. But the IRS doesn't know that because they're just getting the 1099 from the brokerage, and for whatever reason, the brokerages oftentimes have this mistake where they just have a $0 cost basis. So it's one that just like one of the small things to look out for. If you're noticing you're having a large tax bill, just like double check that the cost basis, if you sold RSUs or sold any stock at all, was correctly labeled in your 1099. Is like one of the biggest things that I see. The other one is just, again, just like if you work somewhere with an ESPP, which is an employee stock purchase program, the same issue can happen where the cost basis is incorrectly entered. That gets a little more complicated tax-wise, but again, essentially, if the cost basis is 0, something's wrong. Like it's never, very rarely going to be 0. And then the other one is going to be like, if you're doing a backdoor Roth, so this is that $7,000. This is separate from the mega backdoor Roth. There's just an extra tax step. Like there shouldn't be any tax implications if you're performing a backdoor Roth IRA. But if you're entering this information into your into TurboTax and you see your tax bill increase when you enter it, just know that there might have been a mistake to like double click on. So those are like I think I hit on like 4 common tax mistakes I see are like the big ones that I think people should double check to make sure that they're doing right. And even if you have an accountant, it's a good one to double check on their behalf too. I've seen CPAs also get this wrong.
Yeah, plus when that cost basis at 0, especially if you transfer those RSUs, that happened to me, and I had to go to my brokerage and they had to reissue the 1099. So do that. Now I want to transition to our final topic here, and we only have a little bit of time, but I want to understand the path to FIRE, because I feel like you've done deeper analysis on this than the average person. You've written a post, for instance, on how much is enough to FIRE in San Francisco. I think that's a topic a lot of people really want to know. So can you share like any surprising insights from your analysis and kind of like the key takeaways that you've come to?
Yeah, no, this conversation has been a lot of fun. Like we spent a lot of time talking on the product growth side. But actually right now, like I'm semi-retired. Haven't been working in product growth for the past year and a half since I was laid off from Meta in May 2023. Since then, I have enjoyed not having a job. I don't say fully retired because I have a 6-year-old and my wife's still working. So I refer to myself as a stay-at-home dad. And I highly recommend that path when your child is in elementary school. It is much easier than dealing with a pre-elementary school child. I will tell you that working in a FAANG job is easier than being a stay-at-home parent. I'll just put that out there. But now talking about the financial independence side, which is what I spend most of my time now thinking about and writing on my newsletter, all around just helping people take advantage of these huge FAANG salaries to give themselves more optionality in their lives to be able to have the option to not need to work. It's not about retiring and doing nothing, but more around being able to have the flexibility and the option to do what they want in their life without having money be the primary optimization factor. Like if you're working at a FAANG company, you won the income game. You can start optimizing around something else if you're able to manage your finances in the appropriate way. It is very easy to spend as much as you make. Even if you make $500,000, it's easy to spend that. Like you start adding in 2 cars, you start adding in a expensive mortgage, or like a lot of like just really large recurring costs. Then once you have kids, it's private school, it's like tutoring, it's like a traveling sport league. So you'll see people making a lot of money spending it all. Again, like there's nothing inherently wrong with it, but if one of your goals in life is to be able to be financially independent and retire early, and again, early, like people oftentimes be like, oh, retire at 30. The average age or the traditional age of retirement in the US is 65. Anything before 65 is early. So don't feel like, hey, I'm listening to this and I'm like 40 years old, I'm late. I'm like, anything before 65 is early. Oftentimes you have people retiring very early. In my case, still like the pre-40 age range of being able to be optional on work and be able to spend times on like these fun little side projects, talking about financial independence, doing these podcasts during the day, like all these little things. That's like less around making money and more around what are things that energize me and give me personal passion. So a lot of the work that I do now is like helping people get to that point. And it all comes from like I approach it in the same way I approach a growth problem at Meta. Like we said, within Meta, it's all around understand, identify, execute. I think it's the same thing for your personal finances. And it all starts with that understand. And the understand for me is all around like add that logging into your life. So if you're working on growing a product, the first thing that you're going to do is work with your data scientists, data engineers, is to add logging to understand how your metric moves, to understand all the inputs of your metric. For your personal life, what does that logging look like? So a lot of it is around spend tracking. I love using lots of different tools. Like Mint was the OG tracking software that just shut down. But I use a number of different ones. Like, I don't know, there's like Monarch, there's You Need a Budget, there's like Old School Quicken, there's Rocket Money, and a dozen other ones that exist now, all around helping people track their finances. And I think that's like step one. It's just like, one, understand how you're spending today. And it's not about budgeting. If you're making a lot of money potentially, it's not around like budgeting to restrict cash flow. It's more around tracking to understand how much you're spending, to understand how much your burn rate is, to understand how much you need potentially for an emergency fund. So if you do get laid off, you're not stressed out, and you're able to kind of sleep at night and not worry about how it will affect your family and how you'll be able to survive 6 months without a paycheck. It's just that understand is so core. And it always starts with like, how much are you spending today? And then breaking that down further, like how much is absolutely discretionary, and how much is absolutely fixed. Like, I need to pay my rent. I need to like pay for like the water bill. I need to pay for the electricity. There's like the core discretionary things that can't change. And I need some amount for groceries. My family needs to eat. But then there's a lot of like flexibility, particularly if you're younger, you don't have kids. Like my restaurant budget, a couple $1,000s, or like my travel budget. All of these things that you could then potentially scale back on. So just like not needing to scale back on, but just like knowing how much you could if you needed to. So understanding how much you spend, understanding how much of it is discretionary versus not, and then start taking the steps into place of like, there's going to be extra if you're being diligent around your savings, if you're earning a lot of money. How do you best take advantage of what to do with those extra funds? And for me, around, again, we talked about the 401k pieces, like taking advantage of all your tax advantage pieces. But then maybe that's limited. Maybe you're saving even more. And then it's around saving into like a normal taxable account. And then that's like the initial understand piece. And like we're starting to go into like identify the levers. A lot of it is around like, what are the different places I could be putting my money? Early on, the vast majority of your net worth is going to be coming from new savings contributions. Like everyone talks about like the magic of compound interest, but that doesn't kick in right away. It's going to take a little bit of time for that to start. And if you're earning a lot of money, the amount that you're saving physically each year is going to be a bigger contributor than the compound interest of your investments. Over time, the interest will end up being a bigger component of like your year-to-year changes. But the thing that you can control and the metric that you can move is going to be how much you can physically contribute to your savings and retirement accounts more broadly. So that's kind of like the first thing. And then the second one is, how does this all relate to FIRE and early retirement? Once you understand those numbers, once you understand how much you need to spend, you can start playing with some, like there's different online calculators around like, okay, if I need to spend $100,000, how much do I need in my savings accounts, investment accounts to actually have that sustain me forever? You'll often hear the 4% rule being used. And that's kind of like one of the original early retirement or traditional retirement numbers that people use as like a rule of thumb. And the way that works is taking your portfolio value, you could safely withdraw in your year of retirement 4% of that total amount. So let's say that you have $1 million. So like, what is 1 million times 0.4? The $40,000. So what's saying in year one, you can withdraw $40,000. That's like physically selling some stock using the dividends that it spit out, and spend $40,000 in year one. And then in year two, you're withdrawing that same $40,000, but then adjusting it for inflation. And then every year you're doing that. And historically, a 50-50 stock bond portfolio, again, knowing where these numbers come from is important. It came from studies around 50-50 stock and bond portfolios. Knowing that has never run out of money in any 30-year period. So that's where that 4% rule comes from. Again, now I'm talking about FIRE and extremely early retirements. So for me, I tend to be more conservative, and instead of 4%, doing something like a 3% rule, which is extremely conservative. There's never been a 60-year period in history where a invested portfolio and almost any mix of stocks and bonds has run out of money in a 60-year time period. And again, all of this is all around optimizing for not running out of money and having a very inflexible spending path where you're having a fixed amount of spend in the year of retirement and then keeping that and adjusting that for inflation. Once you start thinking about a little bit more granularly of like, hey, like if I retire and there's a big recession, that's what these percents are trying to help save you from. This has survived like the Great Depression, every Great Recession, every bout of significant inflation. These conservative portfolio percent withdrawal rates are all accounting for those like worst case scenarios. So in the vast majority of cases, you're going to end up with drastically more money than you even started with if you're using these withdrawal rates. So in most cases, it's all around like, if you have any amount of flexibility, it will make you even more successful withdrawal rate wise. And again, this is at the end of retirement. But I think it's helpful to know these, because that's how you start getting to what a enough number could be. And so for me, I think about enough as, what is the number that I need to live my life as I'm living currently right now without needing to work? I'm not saying you will stop working and never earn a dollar again. I think it's very hard for people with FAANG level skill sets earning a lot of money to not earn anything. And not about like sitting on your hands doing nothing. If you want, you can. But there's going to be something that you're doing that is like making some amount of money potentially. Like even if it's like 10 hours a week. Like maybe you're doing some advising, maybe you're doing some like just like small consulting, just any little thing. Like all of that will drastically improve your chances. But like getting to that enough number is important. That's where I wrote a post on how much is enough in San Francisco. And it was very specific to me. Like, how much do I need in San Francisco to feel like I never need to work again? And it's all around how much I actually spend. That goes back to that understand piece. And taking my annual spend and then taking on like, what are the future costs that I have? Okay, I have a 6-year-old daughter. I want to pay for 4 years of her college. In 14 years or whatever, in 12 years, that will be X $100,000, which is a ridiculous amount. So I know I need to factor that in. And then I need to factor in healthcare, because if both me and my wife aren't working, all of a sudden the U.S. has a very fun healthcare system where I'll need to pay for my own healthcare, and that could be a couple $1,000s per month for a family of 3. Potentially you qualify for subsidies, which is another funny quirk of early retirement. But like not factoring in any subsidies or how healthcare could change, just like knowing all those numbers. I think all in San Francisco, living my current lifestyle, I think I ended up around like 5.6 million being the amount that I would need to never need to earn another dollar again, to pay for 4 years of my daughter's college, to pay for health insurance, and stay in San Francisco. I think it's like the big piece. Like all of this would be infinitely easier in nearly any other city, but it's all around just understanding what enough is in San Francisco, and then you're able to kind of quantify like how much is enough somewhere else, and how much do I value being in San Francisco over somewhere else. And that kind of brings up another interesting thing around just like different locations and what you value. And at the end of the day, it's not all about optimizing for every dollar that you make. It's around like, how do I optimize for my lifetime enjoyment? I'm willing to pay more to live in San Francisco, and right now I can go outside and it's 70 degrees versus where I grew up in Texas and it's like 105 outside. I may, and then I can quantify, like I will pay $80,000 more per year to not have to deal with that potentially. And then you can kind of quantify your decisions. And again, for me, I have a 6-year-old, so I could see myself in San Francisco at least until middle school. Like I feel good about elementary school where she's at right now, and I can reevaluate and have that flexibility to optimize for my family's outcomes that are separate from the monetary. And that's kind of my approach to what is enough, how much is enough in San Francisco, and kind of like the underlying methodology that kind of goes behind how I think about calculating that and like why it's important. Again, like money isn't the main factor. If you're working in tech, odds are you make greater than the average person. If you're working in FAANG, you're like well above, like you won the income game. And it's more around optimizing around different things separate from income, and just making sure you're able to take advantage of the opportunities that you've been given, but then know that you can have a lot of optionality in your life that this money can afford you, if you're able to properly manage and be smart with the money that's coming in.
Love it. And that 5.6 million number, to confirm, that's based on a 3% withdrawal rate?
Yeah, it's like a crazy, super conservative 3% withdrawal rate that has never run out. And like, my enough number is probably higher now. I just moved into a new place that's like significantly more expensive. Still renting. So in theory, my big philosophy is, if you're making a lot of money, like it's fine spending money on, do spend money on things that make it sustainable to keep earning money. So spend money on things that make it easier for you to stay in your job. Because I promise you, if you're looking at a new place to live, maybe it's closer to where you work, and it's like, let's say a crazy number. It's like it's $2,000 more a month. And then for most people, that's going to seem like a ridiculous amount more than they're currently paying. I'm like, maybe that's like double what they're currently paying. But then look at that annualized over the year. I'm like, okay, it's like an extra $24,000 per year. That means I'm saving, maybe I'm saving $80,000 instead of $100-something thousand per year. Like, what does it actually mean in terms of my how long it will take me to get to enough? I'm like, oh, I will need to work at Meta for 2 more months or something like that. Like, it's like the more that you can do to keep yourself in that high-paying job like make it sustainable, because it's hard. It could burn you out. So taking those vacations, spending the money on things that make the grind sustainable is equally as important, because again, like the things that you could be doing to continue earning that salary is one of the things, or getting to enough to back off and then maybe work at that startup or start your own company, and know that you have that buffer where you don't need to earn that $500,000. You just need to earn like enough to bridge that. And maybe you've saved enough now where your core portfolio will grow enough to hit your FIRE goal as long as you're not drawing on it. Now you just need enough to sustain your current spending, which is going to be much less if you were previously saving like north of $100,000. If you stop needing to save that and only needed to earn as much as you spend, again, it's going to be a fraction, and you're able to take those risks around joining that startup, which again may pay off majorly ROI-wise, but it's not a guaranteed thing. Or starting your own business, or any of these number of things that you could be doing to get off that grind. That's why, again, like that's where the value of enough comes from, the value of like optionality.
Love it. All right, so that was our brief overview into FIRE, and obviously you can learn more in his newsletter dedicated to that topic. Let's move into the lightning round, shall we?
Let's do it.
All right, what's your favorite hobby?
Going fishing.
Love it. What's something very few people know about you?
I was actually born in Brazil, and I moved to the United States when I was like 2 years old. Both my parents are Brazilian citizen, dual citizenship. On paper, very Brazilian, but we moved to rural Iowa and then Nebraska, and my parents went full assimilation mode. So despite being on paper very Brazilian, I grew up in the Midwest. I grew up in Texas. I don't really speak Portuguese, so just like a funny thing that not funny quirk of my childhood.
Yeah, I would not have guessed Brazilian. Okay. What's your favorite interview question of PM candidates?
Yeah. Actually, this is one that I feel strongly on. I hate generic interview questions, and I'm going to twist it of like, what are the questions that I hate? The questions that have nothing to do with what the actual job is. That's one of the things I appreciated the most about my interview process at the time at Facebook was every question directly related to the type of work that I'd actually be doing. So any questions that are being asked that are outside of the scope of what I'll actually be doing, I think are mostly waste of time. Again, from a PM standpoint, it's still incredibly important to be able to understand how people deal with like complex situations and being able to interact with other teams in an appropriate way. Like all those soft pieces are important. And again, so I'm not talking about those ones. Those, I think, those types of questions that will get to the root of those apply directly to things that are core to the job. But any trick questions, brain teasers, or random generic questions that they found in a list that says these are the top 10 questions that people should ask, I'm like vehemently opposed to those types of ones. So I'll refuse to answer that question.
What's your favorite product or growth book?
My favorite product growth book. Honestly, the ecosystem evolves so much over time that I don't think that there's like a best book that's out there. I think it's all around just picking up like the patterns that exist behind the books, I think is what ends up being valuable. So like there's no like core book that I think I feel strongly around, but just like understanding the frameworks and like why do the frameworks even come into place, and like better understanding the why behind the frameworks versus memorizing any specific framework or any specific like way to determine how to set goals for your teams or way to determine like what metrics are important. Understand the process that went into it, I think is what I encourage people on, versus again, like the books are good, but being able to understand the why behind them, I think is where I push you to. And like always know that how it applies to your specific situation might be different than how it applies in the book. And always be able to adapt and see what's changing. Again, like the ecosystems that we're working on are constantly evolving. If you talk to someone 5 years ago around how to grow an app, it'll be very different than how it happens now, or even like a month after iOS 14 launched. Like the ecosystems that we operate in, particularly if you're working on like the edge, if you're doing anything AI, like any rule of thumb is going to be thrown out of the water in 3 months, and just being able to understand the core ideas behind the whys and be able to reapply those as the foundation that you're working on changes, as it inevitably will.
Okay, makes sense. What's a newsletter you like reading?
Yeah, honestly, I've been out of the game on my newsletter and podcast this summer with my daughter out of school, being on the camp grind. That said, I know I love your newsletter. I love like Creator Economy by Peter Yang. I love the developing dev, high impact engineering. Like there's like, and then again, like the other classics like Lenny's podcast, or Lenny's stuff is all OG. Gurgley's stuff on pragmatic engineering. Like those are like foundational. You have to read those. Those guys are like the best for a reason. And then there's a lot of like emerging PMs and engineers and practitioners that are writing about their current experiences that I think are awesome.
I love that overview of the landscape. What's a new product you've started using and enjoy?
There is a fun one called Projection Lab. Again, this kind of goes to the early retirement piece. And Projection Lab is a simulation software where you're able to put all of your income, all of your salary, and also simulate all kinds of crazy scenarios. Like, oh, let's say I retire at 40. How does that land in my FIRE goals? Or like, what if I retire at 40 and take Social Security at 72 and pay for my kids' college at these things? It allows you to add all these crazy inputs on it. And the thing that impresses me the most is like, it's like one solo developer on like the East Coast who was doing this part-time, who only recently went full-time on it. So it's being actively developed and it has a really active ecosystem around it. So that's Projection Lab. So shout out to the engineer behind that's kind of like grinding it out.
I love those solo projects. Let's go. What product feature or product are you most proud of shipping?
Yeah, honestly, this is one where I as a big product growth person, I don't get hung up on the big shiny pieces. Like my favorite things are like the small overlooked optimizations where it's around like bringing core functionality that exists on like Android and iOS to like low end touchscreen devices in India that all of a sudden unlock like crazy amount of functionality, just like it was the most overlooked thing. But because we were so deep into the weeds and understood that, hey, a huge portion of people in India have businesses, but they're not active on Facebook for some reason. Oh, there's no way for them to create a page. There's no way for them to create a business. Like just like foundational, simple things like matter so much. And then just nailing those like basic things. I'm like, oh, like no one's replying to their messages. I'm like, are they getting notifications about their messages? Are they getting reminders on those things? Like just like small little foundational tweaks are always my favorite. And it's just like, I'd rather have 100 small little things than a one big giant sexy thing. I think that's where like I've made it easy to not remember every core big thing. It's just like all the small details and inches matter, particularly when you're working on a big product. This is different from 0 to 1. It's more around like focusing on like big established products and continuing to grow them and continuing to accelerate their growth. The details are much more important than like shiny new features or big flashy product launches.
What's one particularly memorable product failure that you learned from?
Anytime that there's like a big migration that's happening. Like my job as within product growth is all around like owning the top line metric and doing whatever I could to be in defense of the top line metric. So maybe that's like, and a lot of times that's like less about shipping features, but maybe it's around preventing other teams from shipping things. And within like, again, a lot of this comes up of like, hey, they're shipping this like brand new functionality, but it hurts the ecosystem in a certain way. And there's a certain point where you fight that fight and prevent the features from launching. But then there's a certain point that you'll hit where you just need to disagree and commit because there's so many resources behind like a specific, often happens with bottoms up refactoring of the entire code base to make it easier to develop on things long term. You could fight those and keep pushing them off. Eventually, it ends up slowing down significant portions of like the teams. And in the short term, it will be a metric hit. And you need to disagree with the prioritization of it in the short term, in the spirit of it being best for the company long term. This is where it's good to have like making sure that your teams are incentivized to think about long-term metrics versus only being overly focused on short-term metrics. I've been caught at times where like my function is to over-index on the short term, and also needing to know when to disagree on any of the changes, but like commit to helping the team then execute on it, and then potentially be there to fix it after things break and go in a different way. And I've also been surprised at the same time where it unlocks new functionality that I didn't think existed. There's been lots of cases of that. Like one of the ones within Facebook was a complete refactoring of how Facebook's pages ecosystem works. Like right now, you can like physically use all of Facebook as your business. Before, you wouldn't be able to do that. And again, like I think it unlocks a lot of interesting functionality where businesses can now do things that users can do where before they couldn't. But in the short term, to get there, potentially broke a lot of the glue and tape that was holding everything else together. And it takes time to rebuild all of those individual levers in the new space. But doing that as quickly as you can sometimes be better in the short term, or the long run rather.
I've experienced that many times. All right, where can people find you online?
Yeah, no, I'm super active on LinkedIn. So look me up, Andre Nader on LinkedIn. You could find me on my newsletter, FAANGfire.com. So FAANG fire.com. And those are kind of like the big places. I'd love to be more popular on Twitter, on Threads, somewhere else, but I've accepted that I have some kind of following on LinkedIn, and I'll just be a LinkedIn influencer for the time being.
All right. And how can listeners help you?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the biggest thing is just like follow me, engage with the things I'm doing, and like ask questions around what compensation things that you're running into. The reason why I've been able to write so much around FIRE is all around my own personal journey. I think that's why what I write resonates with so many people is like, I'm not some financial advisor trying to sell you something and like write about something I read in a book. It's around like what I physically lived in. So an important part of that is like being able to learn what issues people are running into, particularly as it relates to their compensation, particularly as it relates to like changes in how tech companies are approaching compensation, because it might be something that I'm potentially blind to. And again, like my big value is like helping people understand their compensation and make the most of the opportunities that they have. So if there's like new stressors that they have, like, and reach out to me with the questions that they have. I love being able to approach things from a different lens and learn about new issues people are having and seeing how I would approach those.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for being here.
No, thank you so much for having me. It's been a lot of fun.
Thank you so much for listening. If you found this valuable, you can subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or your favorite podcast app. Also, please consider giving us a rating or leaving a review, as that really helps other listeners find out about the podcast. You can find all the past episodes or learn more about the show at product-growth.com. See you in the next episode.